Some of them support our economies, our uh, communities, but they don't all necessarily have to be leaders. There was also talk about need to open spaces for decision making. So Alejandra Mora said to be able to open uh, chairs for women making decisions and discussing matters such as the one we have today. Another topic very closely related to finance, how to position budget, funding in a strategic manner, intelligently, and providing instruments for greater economic independence, because without economic independence, we can't have all the rest. We can't have ways to influence and have a decision-making capability if we don't have this space. And finally, just to leave it at 5, although we did mention more, we also had a good discussion on digitalization, although the last part of that discussion also referred to technologies, technification, technologies in rural areas, in the countryside, but the need for greater technological and digital skills in women to have solutions and investment in climate smart technology so that women could also be part of these processes, and the need to add women from the very beginning to these processes, not just at the end by training them or including them in these spaces, but to have participatory spaces from the very beginning. We also mentioned digital violence, food security, legal frameworks, regulation, but I think those were the main areas, and my colleagues can add if necessary. As to the necessary actions, so just quickly, a need to raise awareness, sensitization from early ages. It's important to position this with young children, boys and girls, because that's where stereotypes are created. And so we can work more on gender roles. Then also participation, so we always have to involve women. Many commented on the importance of focalizing. And one of the other issues that came up was the contribution of women to that cultural shift, that mindset shift. I think this morning Patricia mentioned it, where we need to change the system, not women. So these types of actions geared at these changes were discussed. And with the third and last question, for our group, we refer to risks and challenges. First of all, financing, access to credit, land, as we mentioned before, productive assets, because without that, communities cannot really thrive. Also the distance and the possibility of mobilizing, transporting, because it might be more difficult for rural women, and because there may be gender roles impeding this. Lower digital literacy or financial literacy are also strategic aspects. Viviana also mentioned that there's a disproportion of investment in different areas of investment. So we should look at it from another viewpoint. And Justine added to this by saying that we need to sell this contribution to food security and agri-food systems and position it as it is. It's a fundamental topic, and many times it's not put forth in that manner, and so we lose many opportunities. And finally, insecurity in the northern triangle of Central America, for example, but in many cases where men migrate, women stay behind, and there's violence. And they have to take charge of responsibilities that weren't their own before, plus the ones they already had. So this creates very complex contexts for these women. And I think that would be it, unless anyone from the group wants to add anything. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Carlos, por los aportes. A continuación,
Thank you, Carlos, for your
pasaríamos
contributions. We now
el
have
grupo 2, que
Group 2,
sería la compañera Nancy Moreno.
Nancy Moreno.
Te escuchamos, Nancy.
We hear you.
¿Cuánto tiempo tengo?
How much time do I
5
have?
minutos.
5 minutes.
Viste, estamos siendo bastante solidarias con el plan.
We're being solidary with time.
Bueno, voy a tratar de resumir
I'll
un
try
poco
to
lo que
summarize
en la mesa hemos atendido.
what we
En la
learned
primera- en la
in our
primera
group.
pregunta que era
The
sobre
first
las áreas
question
temáticas, las
on
direcciones que se deberían
the
priorizar.
themes and dimensions to
Se han escogido
prioritize.
5.
We chose 5
5 como herramientas claves para poder
key
generar esos
tools,
procesos
if you
de
will, to
dimensiones, pero también esas
uh,
temáticas claves que
talk
tenemos
about
que
these
tratar, que
key
sería
areas.
ecológica, una dimensión
Ecology,
ecológica,
so an
una
ecological
dimensión
dimension,
sociocultural,
a social
una
cultural
dimensión
dimension,
económica,
economic
donde
dimension,
hacían énfasis en que
emphasizing
resaltáramos la educación financiera
financial
de las
education
organizaciones de mujeres y las
for
lideresas de
women's
nuestros entornos,
organizations and women leaders,
pero también donde se pueda flexibilizar el acceso a
and
ellas a
providing
herramientas
flexible access to
financieras que
financial
les permitan
tools
acceder de manera
that can
mucho más
help them
rápida y pronta a
access
sus procesos productivos.
these productive
En el
processes
tema
quickly.
político, hablábamos de igualdad de oportunidades
On
de
the
todas las
political
mujeres
side,
en el
equal
marco del
opportunities
sistema
for all
político,
women,
porque en el tema político hablábamos, nos
because
centramos mucho en temas de
politically,
participación,
there's a lot
en
of talk
cómo
on
las organizaciones,
participation
las lideresas están
and
participando en esos
as to
espacios
how
donde se toman
organizations and women
decisiones y
leaders are
donde en la
participating in
mayoría de
those
veces ellas no
spaces,
están.
but sometimes
El
decisions are made
otro
without
punto es el
women there.
acceso y uso de las tecnologías como
Also,
el quinto
access and
punto
use of
de las
technologies
dimensiones.
as
En
another
ese
dimension.
punto se habló de innovación, de
We
articulación
discussed
tecnológica
innovation,
y
technological
se presenten
articulation,
soluciones que estén
and
pensadas desde las
solutions
comunidades y no necesariamente
thought
desde la
from
tecnología,
the
sino que la
communities, not just thinking
tecnología
of the
tiene que estar al
technology
servicio de
first,
la
but
comunidad y no al revés,
technology to
la
the service of
comunidad
the
servirle a la
community, not the other way
tecnología.
around.
En la segunda pregunta,
For the second
nos
question,
centramos en los temas de las
we
acciones.
focused on
¿Cuáles eran
actions,
necesarias para
what
generar y
actions were
fortalecer el sistema
necessary
agroalimentario
to
igualitario
strengthen an egalitarian
en el marco de
system,
qué, perdón? Igualitario al 2030, al
looking at
2034,
the
en el marco de las
2034
dimensiones
in the
priorizadas.
context of
Entonces, en eso hablamos de varios puntos
dimensions.
y en esos empezó a
We had
surgir
several points
como
there,
unas mentalidades
and we
específicas.
heard
La
specific
primera se volvió de
ideas
alianzas
such as
estratégicas que sean públicas y privadas.
strategic
Incluimos
public-private
esas alianzas
partnerships.
estratégicas donde también
We
más
included
adelante,
these
pero vamos a hablar de esas
and
acciones y lo
also
que
actions
los empresarios privados
and
también tienen una
what
responsabilidad
private
social
business
y
people
revisar y
can
ver
do. They have
el
a social
tema
responsibility,
de las mujeres, no desde
looking
el
at
énfasis de
the
las mujeres
issues,
solamente,
women's issues,
sino
not
desde el
just
énfasis
from
social. Y
the
ahí
women's perspective, but
también
from the
dentro de la
social
discusión se
perspective.
daba resaltar que esto
The
es un
discussion
tema de
included
derechos humanos, no es un
referring to
tema
this as a human
de,
rights
de
topic,
que no es un tema de las mujeres
not
para las mujeres,
women
es
for
un
women.
tema general donde necesitamos que la sociedad misma se discuta, se problematice las situaciones de las
You
mujeres
need the
para
whole of
efectivamente
society
empezar
to
a darle
discuss
solución
this,
a
to
esas
find
iniciativas. El otro punto
solutions.
era levantar data sobre la propiedad de la tierra
Also,
en la
data,
ruralidad con
collecting data
enfoque de
on
género,
land
porque decían,
ownership
bueno,
in rural
creo que
areas
es
with
lo
a
que acaba
gender-based
también doña Luz.
approach. And this is something
Estamos
Luz
hablando del
mentioned. We're
acceso a
talking
tierras
about access to
en toda
land
Latinoamérica, pero no estamos
all over Latin America,
enfatizando los datos
but
desagregados
not
de cuántas
referring
hectáreas
to
de tierra le estamos
disaggregated
entregando a
hectares
a
as
las
to
mujeres
how
o a
much
las
land we
organizaciones
are giving over
consolidadas
to
como
women
mujeres.
or
Entonces,
women-led
ese tema de acceso a tierras es
organizations.
vital y en el caso nuestro
Access to
que
land is
todavía
vital.
y aún así tenemos
In
uno que
our
otro
case,
dato,
we
todavía es complicado
have some
encontrarlo
information, but it's
de
still
manera
very hard
desagregada.
to find it
Todavía no se encuentra
disaggregated.
esa desagregación y
We
hablábamos
don't
en
have it
algunos países
disaggregated,
que
and
ni
in some
siquiera
countries,
las normatividades
their
están en temas de
regulations don't
sucesiones de manera
even
equitativa,
look
donde se
at
obligue
that.
que sea
There's
esa
no
sucesión de manera
equitable
equitativa y no
succession
que
of
favorezca a
land,
los hombres por encima de
but
las
they tend to
mujeres.
favor men
La
over
otra era
women.
la sensibilización
Then also awareness raising,
estamos hablando de sensibilización para las
sensitization
comunidades,
for
pero también
communities,
sensibilización en materia
but
de lo
also
público-privado,
looking at the public and private
los
spheres
beneficios que se pueden dar
as to
en
access
materia
and
no
benefits
solamente de
that can be
empresas, sino de
provided
las instituciones
from
públicas. La
companies and
segunda era
public and private
en la toma
from
de
the
decisión
public
a través de la
institutions and
mesa de
private
diálogo, una
companies.
política
Then
pública de mujeres. Es decir,
having
la discusión
women's
es que las
public
políticas públicas de
policy
mujeres se están haciendo sin ellas.
include
Es
women, because
imposible que las
sometimes these
mujeres
policies are drafted without
asuman
women.
esa política
And
como
so it's
propia
impossible
si ellas no
to
participan
take
de esas
ownership
mesas y
of
esos
them if they're
diálogos.
not part of those
Entonces, un
working
poco lo que
groups, of those
decíamos es que
dialogues.
hay que asegurar
So we have to
que
ensure
exista una mesa
that
de
there is
participación y de
a group
incidencia
to
por
allow
parte
the
de las
participation
mujeres para
of
la
women
construcción, formulación
to build
correcta de esas políticas.
these
Porque no
policies
es si las
correctly.
organizaciones o si el Estado
It's not a matter
X, Y
of
o Z no quiere
organizations or
hacerlo.
the state
Es
wanting
si
to do it.
efectivamente las mujeres
We have to
necesitan eso
check
para
whether women
producir, para
actually need that to
mejorar su
produce,
calidad de vida
to improve their
en
quality
esos
of life.
territorios. La siguiente era hablar de las escuelas de
Then,
formación.
talking about training
Hablar de las escuelas de
schools
formación de mujeres rurales
for
implica
rural
también
areas.
hablar del cuidado
This
de las
implies
mujeres.
talking
Y
about
estas
caring for
escuelas de
women.
formación era
These
porque
training
muchas de estas escuelas de
schools,
formación es darle la voz.
many of them
Hace
look
poco,
to give
voy a
women
usar
a
esto como una
voice.
anécdota,
Recently,
hicimos un
as an
encuentro
anecdote, we
territorial
had a territorial
del
meeting
ministerio sobre el tema de la
in our
actualización de la ley
ministry
y una mujer
because we had
estaba en un
certain
evento.
updates of a
Me
law, and
dijo,
a woman
es la
came to the
primera
event
vez
and
que me
she
atrevo a
said,
venir a un
"It's
evento,
the first time I dare come
pero
to
aún
such
más,
an
es
event.
la primera vez que
And
voy a
even
hablar
more
en
so, it's the
público."
first time I speak in
Entonces,
public."
eso ocurre de manera
That
muy
happens
reiterativa en
very
el
often
territorio y lo que
in our
necesitamos es poder
territories.
darle
What we
voz a
need
las
to do
organizaciones de
is
mujeres
give
y
a voice to
enfatizar
women's
efectivamente,
organizations.
no necesitamos que todas efectivamente
We
sean
don't
líderes,
need,
pero sí que
again,
todas
everyone to
tengan voz.
be a leader,
¿Sí?
but everyone should
Eh,
have a
se
voice.
habló de construir
We
guarderías,
talked about
fortalecer los
building
sistemas de escuelas
daycare
rurales,
centers,
que esas
childcare
escuelas
centers
rurales
in
estén
rural
relacionadas
schools
con tener
that
guarderías en esas zonas
should be
rurales y en
linked
esos
to a
espacios
daycare center
donde,
near those
donde
schools,
el Estado no está llegando, pero
especially in
además
areas where the
donde esa
state has
infraestructura
not
esté pensada para que el cuidado
established a
se
presence,
pueda
and
en
that
gran
this
medida, pueda colocar
childcare
esto entre
center be
comillas,
thought
ceder
of as
temporalmente de tal manera de que
something
las
that could
mujeres
be
puedan
temporary
ocupar
so that women
espacios dentro de la
can also
agricultura,
work
dentro de
in
las tomas de
agriculture
decisiones,
and
dentro de
find
las
a place
mesas de
to
diálogo, para que
participate in
ellas
working
estén
groups, dialogues,
efectivamente
decision
participando.
making,
El
and to
otro es
have
fomentar una
effective
mayor articulación
participation. And to
interinstitucional.
have greater
Yo en los años
interinstitutional
que llevo
participation or
público,
coordination. In the many
sigo
years I have
insistiendo que
working in the public
la parte
sector, I
más
insist
difícil.
that this
Yo
is the
creo
hardest part.
que la parte más compleja es generar un
The
proceso de
most
articulación
complex is
institucional.
how to
O sea, esa
coordinate
articulación
with other
institucional todavía
institutions.
nos falla
We are
y
still lacking in that
efectivamente
sense,
todavía genera unos
and
vacíos
we
entre
still
una
have
acción y la otra para
large
efectivamente
gaps
ejecutar
between one
lo que
action
las
and the next
comunidades
to
requieren.
truly execute
El otro
what
punto es la
communities
seguridad social
require.
específica para las mujeres,
And
que
then
nos resaltaban
social
mucho
security systems
en la mesa,
specifically
donde
for
se
women
reconozca el trabajo no
to
remunerado que
recognize
realizan las
unpaid
organizaciones,
work
las mujeres en
by
particular.
women's
El otro
organization and
punto es la
women.
formación
Also
obligatoria de
mandatory education
masculinidades, pero
for
también la ley de paridad,
masculinities
que se
and
habló dentro
also
de la
a
mesa.
gender or a
Luego hablamos
parity
sobre
law.
legislar acerca de la
We talked about how to
jubilación de las mujeres,
legislate
es decir,
for
que se
women's
hable de seguridad
pensions.
social en
So again,
materia de
social
aquellas
security,
mujeres
so that women
no pagan constantemente un
that are
aporte
not
pensional, pero
paying
que sí
pension
necesitan pensionar.
contributions still need to
Y
have a
hace parte,
pension.
digamos, de
And
esas
that's
herramientas
part of
claves
the
de las cuales se
key
habló,
tools
pero
we
hablaba también
discussed.
doña Luz en
Luz
diferentes
also
interpretaciones, que habláramos de
on
un
several
seguro
occasions said that
campesino,
we should have
que se
some
hagan
type
como
of
unas acciones de esos seguros
farmers
campesinos, que se
insurance
hable, que esa atención
where
a
we
esos
can
seguros esté pensada
uh,
para los hijos menores,
think
no
about
solamente para
this
jubilarse, sino
for
para
young children, for
atención a
example, not
salud
just for
y para lo que
pensions,
representa
but
eso
to
para
take
los hijos
care of
menores.
their health, so health insurance, and to take care of their young children.
Luego está formalizar
Then
los
to
profesionales
formalize
de cuidado
professionals,
y además
care professionals,
hablar de
and
cuidado
to talk
comunitario,
about community
incorporar en
care,
la
to
discusión a
include in
empresas
the
privadas que
discussion private
efectivamente se
companies
responsabilicen
that
de lo que está
get
ocurriendo en el
responsibility
territorio,
of the situation in the
que ellas
territory.
entran y se
They
lucran
get
de los
there,
territorios,
they from territories, but they do not live in stored capacity in these territories, and they do not necessarily provide well-being to the communities. The follow-up to best practices like the ones in Argentina. I'm sorry, not like in Argentina. There was an example that was given. There was something that was made in Argentina. What they did is that they have good agricultural practices and they provided an incentive to companies. Then we have sessions and prioritization of communities that are paritary by mandatorily paritary. We talked about the state policies, not governmental policies, for them to be able to install within the organizations these dynamics besides international support funds. And the last item, we talked about risk, and we talked about responsible applicability of the private matters. The non-compliance of programs is a risk that can take place. Besides the necessary stakeholders, we need several stakeholders. First, the private sector, the public sector, international organizations involved with the process, cooperation agencies, civil society organizations, specifically NGOs and financial entities. But I did not want to conclude this point. I want to mention here, because I consider vital to end with this vision. Sometime in Colombia, when the President Gustavo Petro became president, there have been a lot of racism topics. And they mentioned a particular topic that Professor mentioned. She's Toni Morrison. She's a philosopher. And she said this: the real function of racism is the distraction. A distraction. It keeps you explaining once and again any reason of the reason to exist. Somebody says that it does not have language, and you spend 20 years proving that this is not true, that you have one. Somebody says that your head does not have the right shape, and you devote time and resources in scientific research to prove that yes. And somebody says that you do not have art, and you dig and you expose the truth. And you expose the truth. Somebody says you don't have a kingdom, so you dig and you prove, you show the truth. But this is not necessary, and anything is enough. There's always going to be something else. I mentioned this because of racism, but not because of racism, but because of women. We are told that we cannot, and we have spent a lot of time and many spaces to generate research processes to continue proving what makes us to be here to a large extent, which is what you're saying, that women have the economy of care that we do is a reality. But I do believe that precisely this, we cannot play this game. We need to move to practical actions that allow transformations in reality and in the territories shift. So we need to put at the service this investigation of these research actions and these spaces of articulation in order to modify the life of people that is waiting in territories that really need this to change already, because they do not have time. They do not have time for us to conduct studies about the access to land. If they are dying because of hunger, they do not have time. So right now, we need to see how we can generate a deep impact that led us to transform this reality. The first point we made was to meet today for these transformation actions. Probably in the next forum or in the next encounter, we can have support and actions that are well seen about the meaning of this. So in the group, it says the international cooperation, international agendas must guide the visions of many states, but we need to talk about the uncomfortable things. We need to talk about how international organizations have not talked about. We need this led us to generate this impact actions, not in favor of companies, not in favor of governments, but in favor of communities. Thank you. And group number 3, represented by Gabriela. Gabriela, my apologies. Only 6 minutes. I do not have too much, not too much else to say. So being here in civil society and public institution and cooperation, you can have a similar scenario. If we start from the basis that our systems, our political system have been concentrators, and this has motivated rural-urban migration, it means that in rurality is where the biggest inequality is concentrated. So women in this inequality, we're going to have the worst historical burden on this. As we said in the group, it was brainstorming. We coincide in to a large extent. So you have the notes of the debate, but it's to make evident that there is a structural problem. We all the actions, all the measures, all the reforms, everything we can say in relation to actions can improve. Sure, but if we do not affect the structure of what we are saying, the structure of what generates inequality, and this inequality as a major development problem of our people, we're going to continue getting together from now to 2034, 2044, 2054. Yes, with big progress that it has happened, but with holes, things that can only occur when we go to the structure. In the group, probably this was mentioned in the other conversation. The point is that we need to go to the decolonization of the states. Once we understand that this is part of the cultural change, we're going to be able to make officials, the social organizations, and not only those led by colleagues, but all of them, as well as international organizations, can make a synergy in order to have everything chain and with a functionality which is the development, the balanced development, as stated by Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico, to go towards to a substantial equality. One of the things that we said in the group is that so how we can agree, all of us, about what are the components and the factors of a system. So we're talking about care systems and the agri-food system, but what do they have in themselves? When all of us can conceptualize the factors and everything related to the development of each one of the systems, at that time we can add not only to have this as a topic of women, but intersectional. This intersectionality lets the public planification puts the budget where is needed, and that this can be supported in data, statistics, georeferenciation. Countries have had more to have this to guide the right public policy. One of the best is that to have a space where we can feed all these experiences that we consider successful or positive in our territories. Because even if a country has generated a mechanism, a platform, and can be shared with the experience of another country, this benefits everyone. We can feed according to the needs. So in this logic, topics of areas that are related to the economic side, funding, credit access, access to fair trade and fair markets. The colleague Irene says that our legislation benefits the private companies. The associations are more and more left behind. So there is a challenge. The challenge we can talk about the importance of association and cooperativism to motivate this to be new sources of organization that let to have a balance to the business development. We know that there are businessmen responsible with the development and co-development, and another irresponsible, which is a perpetrator. So society allows to have powers in the face of these situations. Environmental justice and climate crisis is vital. If in cities we are suffering of water stress, we cannot imagine what will happen in the countryside without water, with rural areas or women and farming union with the society. Believe we should not leave this aside, and the technification of the countryside that was already mentioned here. So that is why we need disaggregated data collection that can take that include the topic of decision making to promote public and private partnerships and society. It is the only way, and I believe at the beginning of this century we evidenced the development because we were linked to the same vision we want to do, and that was to get out of poverty and inequality. And this can only be made with the big synergies. Legislation is vital. We believe that the recommendation for the next forums come from there, that there is a parliamentarian representation to understand that legislation is not a guarantee of rights, but where we have rights, we can assure that they will be executed. This is the substantial equality, but also to expand rights, considering the topic of rural women and agri-food systems. And the challenges, we believe that part of the challenges is, so we say that this agenda is for 10 years, measurements in 2034. There are others that can be achieved, others longer. So we mentioned the longer one, which is to move to a process of decolonization of our societies and our institutions. We need to identify stakeholders, international bank, private sector, cooperation organizations, governments like the local governments that were mentioned in yesterday debate and today, and also identification of organizations as key stakeholders. All of us agree that this space is quite enriching, that hopefully we can keep it and strengthen more and more, and hopefully we can add other stakeholders that are part of the institutionality and the business sector for all of us to be in symphony of what we want to state as a transformational change for agri-food systems. Thank you, colleagues. I believe that the closing this follow-up is challenging because you have mentioned many strategic aspects, and hopefully we'll could have this space that gives us input to continue building and working in conjunction. Now I'm going to take the last words mentioned by Gabriela. We need to understand the factors that impact our system. Our particular case, we as institute, we work with the agricultural sector, and what you are positioning, which is to understand the structure and what is work from the agri-food systems to work and to break this patriarchal structures will help us to reduce these gender gaps. Here, I would like to position these components shared with us in this space, as well as the elements of the need to work in data. It is not by hazard that we have called under the framework of this forum to reflect on the need to join efforts because the states, we have institutions with the corresponding competency, but as Nancy said, one of the challenges we have is the articulation, interinstitutional articulation, multi level. If we add the work between different stakeholders included in the development of states, things become more complex. So this call to data generation, this call to the joint work under the framework of partnerships, public and private partnerships. In one of the groups, if I'm not wrong, I believe it was Sophia who mentioned we need to make a joint work with the private sector in order to transform the awareness raising processes as well as the processes of change. These are part of the components I would like to highlight. Besides this, the awareness raising and training as international organization, one of the mandates is to work in this, and this is not by hazard. As commented, the knowledge generation led us to expand the views, and knowledge led us to have power. Why? When we talk about working with gender gaps. There's no question that we are talking about working in these power structures that have been interiorized for many years, and that, yes, indeed, through these actions, through this call to action, start moving. So this goes hand in hand of what corresponds to the leadership processes, and particularly, Luz mentioned this as well. It is not that we do not have leadership, but we need to participate with the knowledge we have, or to have the possibility, as Nancy mentioned, to speak for the first time in decision-making spaces and to listen the voices of people that live the realities from the territories. And this is a company that Alejandra mentioned this. We need to participate in this decision-making spaces. This occurs in any scope of action. It may be at political level, at the level of organizations, in the company you work, in the different sectors. We cannot continue doing and formulating public policies or interventions in the private sector and among the different stakeholders if we do not understand the territorial realities, and particularly the reality of women. We cannot work without them. I really like your proposal, Gabriela. Internally in the team, we have been stating the need of being able to listen and to work in conjunction with the legislative scope. There's no question that all this is accompanied by the generation. So let's welcome the Minister and Mr. the Minister and the Director General.
Una pincelada de Costa
This
Rica
is an image of Costa Rica in the rainy season. In closing, and to move to the final panel or closing panel, we would like to mention here this need of having an intersectional look. All of us are diverse. All of us have different conditions that we need to take care of according to our ethnicity, our age, our language, our social and economic level. And this starts by understanding the way we coexist and the way all these features interact in the rural environments. Thank you so much, colleagues, for your contribution. And now, with great pleasure, we're going to move to the close segment that I really thank our director to change position for me to start moderating. Okay, I can do it from here. Okay.
Muy buenas tardes,
Good afternoon,
señor ministro,
Mrs. Minister
todos sus autoridades en la mesa
and
virtual.
Director General and the authorities in the head table.
Priscila me preguntó para hacer un
Priscilla asked me
balance,
to
resumen
make
de
a
todo lo
balance
que
of
se ha
the summary
discutido
of
en
everything
los últimos
discussed these last
2 días
2
aquí.
days
Realmente un aprendizaje
here.
también sobre ese tema de mucha importancia.
So on this
Sin duda
very
es un
important
tema en el
topic.
cual el ICA
This is a
toma con
topic
mucha
AICA
importancia.
takes with great
El
importance,
presidente general
and the
nos ha
Director General
solicitado
has
a ver
requested
cómo elevamos mucho
to
más
see how we
este
can raise
tema
this
y la
topic
importancia en el
in
desarrollo
relation
rural.
to the importance of the rural
Quería comenzar
development.
por
I
decir,
would
cuando
like to
escucho
start
los
by saying,
comentarios
when I listen to the
llenos de
comments,
interés por ver
although
el
interest
rol de los
to see the role
cuidados
of care
con la producción y sistemas de alimentación.
with the
La
production of
discusión
food system,
muestra
that
claro que
discussion
necesitamos
clearly
un
show that
enfoque
we
más
need
sistémico,
a more systemic
como mencionó
approach,
Gabriela
as
ahora,
Gabriela mentioned,
donde incluir varias instituciones,
to
por ejemplo,
include
muchos
several
de los
institutions. For
ministerios
example, many
empiezan
ministries
manejando temas
that are
sociales,
managing
esa parte del
social
Ministerio de
aspects
Agricultura,
and this part
y
of the
por lo
agricultural
tanto necesitamos ver
ministry.
la
So we need
intersectorialidad
to
de cómo
open
están
this
viendo las
intersectoriality
políticas
to
y
see how
también los programas sociales.
policies and social programs
Primero
are going
temas
on.
a nivel rural
in at the rural level, what topics affect the development, the rural development, besides the basic services, infrastructure, security, etc. Topics of great importance. Also, the land ownership, access to land, capacity building, and access to the tools mentioned about the need to have simple tools women can have access to. There's no question that when there are discussions, there is consensus that we need more qualification. There are data missing, and to see in order to systematize this information about the care and to support the speech and the standards to progress with the legal frameworks. We need to see the labor legislation and how they are managing in relation to, well, to see what they are doing in relation to women and salaries and the wage gaps that are big between men and women having the same positions. But also, we need to see the diversity that exists in the territories. We know in the territories there are indigenous groups, and these groups have cultures, forms to act that are different. And therefore, we need to see this when we are seeing the organization and how they approach to facilitate training. The role of women includes land care and land ownership, access, which is very important. We know some banks simplify their process to grant credits, taking collaterals and seeing how to remove the barriers because they are having the incentives, credit access, and supporting the risk management because of problems of climate change, the water impact, and many and other risks that exist and economic shocks. It is necessary to make evident the fact that women should have access to financial systems. Propose to defeminize care in order to defeminize poverty. Yesterday, we saw data from rural areas and versus urban areas. Also, saw the problem migration is happening in rural areas, and what are the drivers that we are seeing? That young people and many women are living in rural areas, and how the inclusive development can promote more in order to have more retention, and not only retention, that they come back to rural areas where there are more conditions and opportunities in those areas. This is also an area where family, agriculture, and territorial development in AICA is taken. There are options to benefit rural women. We also talked to analyze what are the models. Some countries show progress in this aspect. We need to systematize it. So to learn where the factors that are leading to success, where they are, and therefore this model could be adapted in different countries and under different conditions and rural territories and areas. The model law is an example of a transformational agenda that considers the need of care, services, and infrastructure, economy of care, unpaid. And we also talked about the private sector. Here, I would like to highlight that many companies now have the social responsibility. We need to see how social responsibility could be linked and articulate with these areas of intensive care as another way to see the inclusion of the private sector. In summary, I would like to conclude by congratulating the participants for this task. The team managed by Priscilla Zuniga, but there are several problems of AICA where we're going to work all together to take care of this topic. And Now, with the direction of Mrs. Manuel Otero, we're going to continue strengthening this area and providing attention to the topic. I really thank the team of Priscila Zuniga, manager of Gender and Care team, for the work and the work they have been preparing for months with the support of the chief of staff and myself for this meeting be successful. And we hope that you will go back with more knowledge. AICA is always willing to continue providing the follow-up. Thank you very much. Thank you, our Director of Technical Cooperation, Mr. Mohammed Ibrahim. With this, we will continue in this closing process, and let's listen the words of the Minister, Mrs. Cindy Quesada, Hernandez, Ministry of the Condition of Women in Costa Rica. Thank you, Minister. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Director, to help me to change a little bit of the agenda, because in fact we have commitments with rural women precisely. I see Ms. Rosano here, accompanying the Forum of Rural Women in Costa Rica. This last days in our beloved Ministry of Panama. I had the honor to have her company yesterday or the day before yesterday. There are so many days in this week that I have had some 5 Mondays this week with the Forum of Political Women. Those are municipal women, local authorities. Why these spaces are important? Precisely under the framework of positioning rural women in the center of the agenda of public policies, which is vital for us as the national public policy, the process of regionalization and taking institutional programs to the territories was the guideline studied by this administration 2.5 years in this process. The modernization of mechanisms is vital. Why? Because we need the supporting process, raising process, support process, resources, in women empowerment come from the centrality. So we can continue making public policy from a desk based on the privilege of those who are on a differentiated position, and that we do not feel the intersectionality on our skin. We mentioned this as a speech, but it is hard for us to understand that for the women in rural areas, knowing that they cannot get sick, they cannot have a child. One day, the doctor is not in the island, and they have to walk 400 meters with labor pain. It is not easy to identify from a desk. So the importance of restating the mechanism. We celebrate 25 years as a National Institute of Women with robust policies with 2 large deficiencies, in my humble opinion. I have tried to explain this not from the technical point of view, but from the management point of view. We have not assessed consciously the impacts of these public policies. And number 2, we have not strengthened in the territories. It is difficult to generate public policies appropriate, pertinent, appropriate to these vulnerabilities that are when you are a rural woman, but an indigenous woman, an Afro woman, and probably with some level of disability. This is not the same thing than doing this in urban areas. In that regard, this is an exhaustive work we have been performing from this administration, making a whole institutional transformation that has permeated the regionalization of public policies for the first time with an action plan of gender and climate change that has a declaration of national interest. This led us to have superpowers because it gives us the possibility to work with other institutions. Because the gender aspect is not only the responsibility of the National Institute of Women. Nowadays, Costa Rica is working on a modernization, and the Ministry of Finances working with gender perspective budgets to identify in each institution how much is being invested in closing the gaps. If we don't see this, we don't have the information, we cannot realize if we are investing where needed. The rule from the Rural Women Forum Rosario had the honor to, yes, it's not an INAMO forum. It's a forum of the Rural Development Institute. In there, it is a forum of a mechanism of an institution that, in principle, does not have women face, but it is investing because the difference of a speech to prioritization is where you put the resources. When it said that we are investing, that we are generating the governance spaces for women from territories can define what do they require, how they need to be supported and collaborated is when we're saying we are transforming. It is not easy. It is not easy to transform genetics of the institutions that have not been designed to open spaces of listening the voices of women.
For me, I say I believe we have empowered them so much, and I see them that they demand so much of them, but we can see the efforts made because looking back, there has been significant change, and we want to continue with that. We need, of course, to accelerate that change. That's what this administration did. We designed a gender roadmap, not to reinvent the wheel. We all know what we have to do, but this just prioritized some of the topics. We don't have much time. So economic independence of women, living free from violence, and care, because care is a cross-cutting issue. We cannot have independence of women if we don't help them with the biggest barrier, which is care. Because mostly it's women spending time in care, but also in unpaid work, almost double as much as men in urban areas and almost triple as men in rural areas. And unpaid women's work in rural areas tends to be 80%. This is an equivalent of 50% of production. So it's a really impactful number if you look at the figures that way, as we heard by Mr. Mohammed. It's not the same to talk about women if we don't have resources, if they don't have the possibility of owning land, which is an element that they need. I heard them last week say we can't work land we don't own. These are loaned lands. They're just leases, and then it doesn't make much sense. And if you think about it, when you're going to buy your own home, you really don't want to pay rent for something that's not your own. Imagine them working land that is not their own for years and years. And it's really something that was clear to me in this forum. We made certain efforts in DER, in the Development Institute. We now have soft credit skills for women. There's a line of credit with an environmental perspective. Women can have up to 2% interest. It's really symbolic, changing from 8 to 2%. And we also have a committee because many times women that are dealing with land ownership issues with their couples, they renounce to the land and nobody asks themselves why. And it's because in the end, it was domestic violence that was beneath that. So today, anytime a woman renounces her right in favor of their spouse or her partner, we analyze to understand what's going on, to rule out violence. Because, of course, violence is present in women's lives all over the world. It does not change from academic formation or different social classes, but in the rural areas, it's very cultural, it's more accentuated in rural areas and indigenous areas where stereotypes and chauvinism are still very much present today. Part of the efforts made, and we heard this from the director, a national strategy for financial inclusion of women. We have guidelines for financial companies that prepare specialized products, develop products for women. There's a national strategy for employment and employability of women. And to close, Costa Rica, in terms of care, understanding is the first barrier to have quality employment, has been making important steps in the region. We have a national care system and also a national care network for young children and also for dependents and the elderly. For now, we don't have enough coverage. We know we need much more, and we don't have the resources. The number of women that need these services is quite large. So part of the strategy involves asking the Women's Institute to design a co-payment model for care with women at the very center of the debate. Not necessarily the beneficiaries, but women as means to support them so that they can be part of the workforce. And so we have a very good project called Crece, Grow. It's a shared responsibility of care and economic responsibility, thinking of women first. It's a co-payment model. We've already done a first model, a first pilot with several companies that paid for 80% of the cost, the other 20% by the beneficiary. These were, of course, robust, established companies that understood that the cost was well worth the investment. We see studies that anytime someone goes to work or leaves the workforce, it's 3.5 base salaries per year. And then you have to invest in recruitment, training. So companies understand that it's good business. It makes good business sense to keep the person as part of their employees. So we designed a model for the different companies in Costa Rica for SMEs. And the state with INAMU would be paying 55% of the cost, the companies 20%, and beneficiaries 25%. It's designed for women heads of household that are not necessarily making minimum wage. It goes up to the non-professional salary with a diploma degree. A woman that earns $1,500 and it has to pay 800 in care, of course, is very vulnerable. So it's focused on this model. We hope over these 2 years we can prove that it works. And according to actuaries, we would not be duplicating. I thought we could duplicate it if the state participated in 50, not 100%. But according to actuarians, this could allow us to quadruple the impact and coverage of our care service system in Costa Rica. We are taking strong steps towards acknowledging care as the big obstacle that does not allow economic independence and breaking free from cycles of violence. Thank you so much. I just came from Parrita, far away from here, a rural area. I was supporting the community there on a walk for peace because we need peace for women, but for society as a whole. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a la ministra Quesada por sus
Thank you
palabras.
so much, Minister Quesada, for your words. Thank you for making the effort to join us. We now give the floor to our Director General of ICA, His Excellency Manuel Otero. Thank you, Priscilla, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's really hard to talk about the strong words and message of the minister. I thank her so much because she said she came from Parrita, that there was hail, strong winds and rain, branches falling. So it's very important for her to be here, and it shows. Thank you. Thank you to all the delegations that came here. I apologize that I was not able to participate throughout the whole meeting. Thank you so much to our strategic partners, the World Bank, CAF, SEAM. Knowing that we have to work together, it's the only way to truly accelerate in progress. But I am especially very proud of ICA's team. If we may, let's give a big hand to Priscilla and her team. Led by Muhammad Ibrahim, and they've done wonderful work. I know that it has been months in the making, with some joys, commitments, a bit of frustration to come to this meeting that is, of course, an important milestone for all of us towards gender equality. As we heard from Dr. Muhammad Ibrahim, I have such a great team that I already have points that I had to state, but I won't do it because he has summarized the spirit of this meeting. And to emphasize, as Carolina Mejia said, gender equality is not just a right, but a driver for sustainable development. And I have to say, it's a duty for all of us. It is one of those topics that humanity has still pending, and here at ICA we are very much fond of progressing towards that. There are specific tasks left, such as supporting public policy in agriculture and territorial policies with a gender-based approach, positioning the Observatory of Policies as a hemispheric tool for access to good practices and legislation in gender and agri-food systems, and lastly, strengthening training schools in rural areas, in-person training, especially emphasizing on women getting to know their rights and using them in decision-making spaces. I also wish to highlight the fact that ICA thinks as cooperation as a verb, not a noun. We really have to convince ourselves that it is time to act now, because our planet is also facing certain risks. Our institution, and I say our institution because ICA is all of ours, it belongs to us all, and it's trying to progress. Possibly in January next year, we will try to get certified on gender equality issues. Yes, the equality seal. Thank you. That means it's not just because we want to have the seal. The seal, something we might get, but it's really everything else that will help us understand what we still have pending. We want to be self-critical and understand the path we need to move forward in. Coming over here, I was telling the minister because the main lobby of ICA has all the tables set because tomorrow we will have an Olympics, a youth Olympics. I said 300. I'm not sure if it was so many, but they will come together to discuss new technologies for agriculture. And those are the types of things that, for me, confirm that ICA is a live, living organization, that it wants to learn, it wants to learn from its mistakes. We do learn from our mistakes, especially if we're close to each other, and work together to move forward. Cooperation is action, cooperation is commitment, is no one being left behind, and I'm sure that all the achievements that our minister said for one country should apply for the whole continent. If we help each other, if we hold each other's hands and advance together, after this meeting, there's much reason to continue working that way. Thank you so much for all your efforts, and we will continue in contact. And a warm embrace to all. I was asking Dr. that if he allowed me to make an announcement, and he did. So I feel very proud because one of the pioneers for there to be a Declaration of the Americas for rural women, and the Decade of Rural Women is here with us. And I am so honored because I was an ambassador of her request. And so I'm so glad to hear that. And the first celebration, the first in-person celebration on April 19th, the Day of Rural Women for all of the Americans, the 17th of April, sorry, will be in Costa Rica. So I wish to invite you all very cordially to ICA, that's here as well. Please join us for that date and let us strengthen our alliances in the context of that great celebration. We are going to the CSW to ensure we have worldwide commitment beyond the Americas. Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Minister, for this wonderful announcement. With that, we close this fifth edition of the Permanent Forum of Ministers, Deputy Ministers, and High Officials of the Americas. We thank you so much for the process, for the dialogue, and everyone who also joined us virtually. We hope to meet again soon in the different venues where we will continue working and fighting towards gender equality in agri-food systems and in the world. Let's not wait 286 years, as UN said, for women to have the same rights as men. Thank you so much, everyone.